What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Travis. Of course, this is TWA Motorsports, and today, well, we got a ton of stuff scattered out around the shop, but I want to start putting the 4L80 back in the truck, right? So remember, we pulled out the 4L60 in the last video. I told you I might break this up in a couple videos because of time, and I wanted to show you guys as much as possible. So what we have now is my cleaned up 4L80 that I got setting up here. And so we need to do a couple things to it before we obviously hoist it up in the truck. I will tell you that I lifted this one off by myself, but I used my cherry picker to put this on because this thing is ridiculously heavy. So either way, I'm gonna walk you guys through the steps of, I'm hoping to get a majority of it done today. I don't have the drive shaft made yet because I want to get it up in place before I get a drive shaft made, but we'll just kind of go through the process of what we're going to be putting on, and starting with the converter. Now, I've had these converters, actually I bought two at the same time, one for the Trans Am because we are putting this 4L80 in the Trans Am. And so I've got the box for the one that goes in the truck. They are different because of the size of the vehicle and what I told them I was going to be doing with them. So they are different, and they actually write with a marker on the converters, luckily, because otherwise I have two and I would have no idea what went where. But the bottom one that you see down there is going to go in this transmission, and but some other stuff that we got for now is obviously we're going to grab the converter, but we also got from Glenn's Auto Performance this whole setup to do a 4L80. It's a transmission cooler. So obviously anytime, guys, you do a aftermarket stall converter, you want to put an additional some sort of additional cooling capacity on there. So I'm going to use this only, so I'm not going to be tying into my factory stuff. I'm actually going to take those lines out of the truck, which will probably make a huge mess. But either way, that is what we are going to be doing. So the very first thing I'm going to do is we're going to pour some fluid in that converter, at least a quart of fluid, and then we're going to get it up here and try to get it in place. I'm telling you guys, this thing comes in a box that looks like I don't know, like a jewelry box or something. This thing is absolutely insane. It says to pour a half quart in there. I'm gonna see if I can get a little more than that in there. Anytime you can put fluid in, I'm just using ATF, guys, Dextron 3, Merc 5, or Mercon, or whatever it's called. Anytime you can put some in there, that's always good to pre-lube the converter. And it'll take a little bit to gurgle down and get in all the fins and whatnot. You may have to kind of move it around from side to side. It will make a little bit more of a mess when we install it, but this is kind of where I wanted to start. While that converter is draining down, we need to take these two fittings off. So you can see on a 4L60, they're right here, they're together, but on a 4L80, the newer style anyway, which is what both of mine are, they're farther apart. So I've got an 18 here, and so we're just going to take this guy off, at least hopefully. And an 18 is a snug fit on this thing, that's for sure. I'm going to take this time to clean off. I don't know if you guys can see all that dirt. I'm going to be changing the filter once it's in the truck. There's just no good way for me to change the filter, obviously, right here. So we got one of our fittings off. Like I said, I'm gonna clean that a little bit, trying to keep a majority of the dirt out here. And then let's see if we can get this one off. This one actually feels, there is no way an 18 is going on that. Maybe that's more of a 3/4. 3/4 is a little loose here, so we'll grab it and get it off too. 3/4 is, in my opinion, a little, it's not as loose. The front one it was really loose on, that's weird. So these fittings should be different, and you'll see what I'm talking about when I get them out. So we saw the front one here. This one should go a little further in though. The other thing that's kind of alarming, see that? See the difference between the two? There's no O-ring on this one, which is weird. So it had a little more dirt around it because of that. I'm surprised it didn't leak, and maybe it did, although there wasn't a trail of leak. But let's go grab our new pieces. Like I said, I'll clean that out real quick. And we'll go grab a couple new pieces that come with this kit that I'm using from Glenn Auto Performance, and to put the new fittings in. So the fittings that come with this kit, you can see you've got a long one for the back, and then you've got a couple new O-rings. So we're gonna put these O-rings on, and then I did, guys, go ahead and splurge. I've never had a set of AN wrenches, but I got a set from ICT Billet. It's a really nice set, comes with all of them, or at least all that I think I'd ever need. These are aluminum, these fittings. So while I slide this up here, I do want to take the time to make sure that I don't over tighten these, right? You've got that rubber grommet there to kind of close that gap. And so just be careful, don't over tighten this. You will strip them. With them being aluminum, you will strip them really, really quickly. So we'll get both these in here. And then there are a couple things that we need to swap off the other transmission. Like we need to put this came out of a van, and so it doesn't have a dipstick tube, or didn't have a dipstick tube. And so because of that, we're gonna have to put a new grommet in there, and obviously we're gonna have a dipstick tube. So, and then I'm gonna just push this down just to make me feel more comfortable. Didn't look like it was rolling down all the way. So we'll get these in and snug down, and then we'll move on to something else. We're gonna pop this plug out here. That I might keep around because honestly, that could come in handy. And I'm gonna pull this old grommet out. I'm gonna clean around that area, and we're gonna put a new one in place. Got that all cleaned out. Let's push our new one in. Okay, we've got everything on that side. I think what we'll do now is there is a vent that I need to take off the other transmission and move over here. You don't have to do that, I don't guess, but we're here, it's loose off the other transmission, so I'm gonna grab it and move it over. This thing here, you can see it goes up and hooks on one of those studs, but then it just plugs in like this, and it's got just a small little clamp. I'm just using a pair of pliers that I had over here to get it up into place. And that's all there is to that piece. Now, we need to, on the other side here, we need to attach our controller. So you guys know that on the 4L60, and even on these, you're not gonna see this on the Trans Am, but we'll talk about that when we get to that point. But there's a little box here that everything hooks up to that tells you what gear you're in and whatnot. Well, that's interchangeable from 4L60 to 4L80. So we're gonna pop it off the other transmission and get it up here on this guy. So I may have to move my chain here, but this guy, it bolts on a little bit differently on the 60 than the 80, but it still does go on. So we need to kind of maneuver this in. This is cut out a certain way, so it may take a little bit. I don't know what gear this thing's in. There we go. Helps if you're on the same level as it, getting things lined up. It'll move, but I'm definitely gonna have to move my chain here to get it to go where it needs to go. I got my chain over a little ways, and these are just 13 millimeters. And I try to line it up. You can see where this one was mounted before. I try to line it up in that manner. So that's good. Now we need to put our little arm on. And this arm needs to face in. Okay, so the tab on the bottom here, where you hook up the shift linkage, that needs to face towards the inside. And this guy's a 15, like I said. We'll get it on there. So you can see that's putting us in whatever gear. That should be park. The next thing we need to do is get a T40, and we need to take the piece that actually holds this. Uh-oh, that's not gonna work. I'm gonna have to use the one that came off the other vehicle. I thought this one would work. Generally they fit, but this one is not going to fit. So we'll have to grab the one that came off the other truck. Got that one, and it's just got a different cutout, obviously, for the controller. Your main controller on the 4L60 is on the opposite side. So not a big deal. This should be fine. And then we need to tighten that down. And at this point, I think we'll go grab either the converter or the lines that go, we may go ahead and put the lines in place. I'm gonna go ahead and put the converter in. Now look, I put, you know, probably a quart of fluid in this thing, and it is not the lightest thing on the planet, but let's go ahead and see if we can get it lined up. So we're listening for 3 clicks generally, guys. There's 1, there's 2. Sometimes you got to go back and forth, and I may have got it on the first one the first time. I think I did. You'll know if you're not seated properly because you'll start to touch on the flywheel before you get there, and oh my gosh, you don't want to do that. That will smash the pump in this transmission. I generally like to go back and forth 2 or 3 times to make sure that it's in there. I'm probably too paranoid that I'm not going to get it, but that looks pretty good. Like I said, we'll know a little more once we get it up in the car, but man, that thing, it's almost like a piece of artwork, to be honest with you. They do such an incredible job. Okay, let's move on to the lines. So I'm going to go ahead and get the lines kind of in place that way, and we're not going to tighten them. We're just going to loosely thread them on, because once we get it up in the car, it's going to be really tough to get up in there and reach that and try to make adjustments or tighten things up. Now I did snug these down, remember, but this here, we're not gonna snug those down yet. Now, if you're using the same kit as me, you'll have a long and a short, right? So the longer one is for the front of the transmission. All right, so we're gonna just loosely thread that on there. Like I said, we're not tightening anything. We're just putting it in place. I'm leaving the plastic on the other end for now, just to keep dirt and debris out of it. And we may have to find a place to kind of tie it up. I may just set it here for now, but we'll figure something out. And then the back line, obviously, is the shorter line. And we can go ahead and put it on as well. And this does have some swivel in it, so don't freak out if it's not going the way you want it to. That is a snug fit. Snugger than I'd like. Almost acts like the threads are jacked. There we go. Sometimes you just need to be patient. But that's got quite a bit on it there. Okay guys, well, I think at the next thing we're ready to get this thing kind of up in the truck. I do have a new dipstick tube that I'm going to thread up in the truck. I ordered one for a truck that would have one of these transmissions because we're going into a, obviously, Silverado platform. They do make a separate dipstick tube for that. So I'm going to go grab it and we'll kind of snake it up in the truck, and then we'll wheel this thing under and see if we can get it up at least onto the block. Before we wheel that transmission over here, I did unhook these lines. Oh man, that was a good catch. That was what I was gonna tell you guys. I spent about 5 minutes cleaning the stickers off this new dipstick tube. But this guy kind of goes in there. It's gonna go up in this very top, probably, I'd say the 2 o'clock position. It's gonna go over one of those studs once we get it in place. So I've kind of got it loosely sitting there. I may have to grab a zip tie or something to keep it up there. I think once the trans starts going up in place, we'll be fine. But you wanna make sure that none of your wires up here are gonna get in the way. I think I've got a majority of those out of the way as well. But this transmission's quite a bit heavier. So as we lift it up, you know, when we start to let off, you're gonna get a lot more fall than we had on the 4L60, just because the trans is so much beefier. But a couple things I'm watching for here, guys. Remember on the red truck, if you guys watched that video, I had issues with clearance on the headers. And so I'm really, really hoping that I don't have to cut the ears off that trans, because there is a closeout panel that you can get for the 4L80. Some engines, you know, it isn't a big deal. I think it looks really nice when it's on there and you don't see the bottom of the converter. Now look, that converter's good looking, but anyway, we're gonna try to shove it up in here and kind of see where we're at. Another thing we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be trying to put our, these lines that we put on kind of through the same, almost the exact same path as the ones that you have. You can see I've still got the ones in there, but like I said, the exact same path that we took with the other ones. Otherwise, I'm hoping I don't have to take the ends off of them. I don't think I'm gonna have to, but. Nah. Oh, the end came off anyway. But either way, I'm just gonna kind of snake them up through there as we're going. That way we don't have any, you know, hiccups. And we'll just keep pushing those through as we come up with this transmission. Tighten this thing up. And we'll see what happens. Like I said, I'm gonna pump a little, and then we'll pull those lines a little further through so we don't get any kinks. You know, this line isn't quite as forgiving as rubber. And once you get a kink in it, it's there. So be careful, guys. Take your time. I'm probably gonna get this all the way up in there and have to bring it back down to trim the ears off is what I'm hoping. I'm hoping not, but we're gonna see. I'm starting to see them come down the front, which is good. Let's push this thing a little further in. There we go. See how they're kind of making their way in? That's why you didn't want to tighten those up first. We're getting to the point where we're probably going to have to start moving them around the side of the transmission and then working our dipstick tube kind of closer to where it needs to be. You can see we'll need to get these kind of over in this area. And then we're gonna need to get our dipstick. My dipstick tube is still loose, so let's just not hit the headers. That's what I want. That's what I don't want. Still looking good there. Now we could probably start getting our dipstick tube a little closer to where it needs to be. Got a bad feeling, guys. It's gonna be really close to that header. Still not kinking any lines. I know I kicked the camera here. All right, keep going. Whew. I probably should have taken those other trans lines out, but too late now. I want to start, as we're going up, start sneaking that dipstick tube in place. We got a long way to go. Starting to get a little nervous about this. Header deal. This is quite a bit bigger transmission. Uh-oh, what'd I hit? Oh, the dipstick tube. Okay, the dipstick tube is starting in the hole now. We're really close on those headers. We're also really, really close to the dipstick tube going completely in. Okay guys, so if you're doing this, take your old lines out. I was lazy, I didn't want to put the lift down to do that. I don't want to speak too soon, but I think we may clear the header. I really do. At least on that side. This side may be another story. Well guys, we are in. We are so super close to the header with that ear over here. We're quite a ways away on this side, but either way, it's up on the dowels. We want to make sure we don't have any of our lines pinched, so you need to be able to see, you know, all the line holders that are up there, and I can see all mine, I think. Yeah. Got one. Oh no, the fuel line, I can see it too. So the fuel line ties into one of those studs. So I'm gonna go grab a couple bolts. I'm gonna loosely thread this thing up. Okay guys, I've got 2 bolts on this side, 2 bolts on this side, none on the top. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the chain off at this point, and we're gonna release a little bit of pressure, let this thing fall down somewhat, and then we're gonna see if we can go ahead, get a couple more bolts in the top. And then what I'm wanting to do is, like I said, I'm gonna change the fluid on this thing, and I probably shouldn't have put this guy in place, but oh well, we can take that back off, it's not a big deal. Either way, I'm gonna drop it down, like I said, a little bit. And actually the chain is not even hooked up, so that makes that easy. We'll get the chain off here, and it's between the fittings. And then, like I said, we'll lower it down some. I still want to have some support on it. I may go get one of my screw jacks and put underneath this and just get this whole thing out of the way, but that's the next plan. So with the swivel, you can go ahead and get everything in place up top. So there's only 2 more, honestly. There's not one in the 1 o'clock position. So all I had to do is put the 2 up there, the one in the 12 o'clock position and the one in like the 11 o'clock position. Now I did go ahead and torque those guys. So those torque to 37 foot-pounds or 40. I generally torque to 37 on a aluminum block and 40 on a iron block. This is an iron block, so I went to 40 on that. And then we have a series of 13s that hold, obviously, the dipstick tube. I went ahead and put it in place as well. So you got to swing your dipstick tube over and clamp it down. And then on the other side, your fuel line, I think it's a good idea to get that one. And the last one is the very top, and that's that vent tube that we transferred over from the other transmission. So you don't have to necessarily put those back in place. I like the one on the fuel line, making sure that it's there and it's easy to reach, but the one up top I did get, but it's a pain to reach for the vent tube. So at this point, it is secure, and actually this isn't even holding anything at this point. But I'm gonna go ahead and take those, I think they were T40s out here, and then 10 millimeters to get the pan off and let it kind of drain. We're gonna change the filter and clean up the pan a little bit. Got my drain pan. Almost made a huge mistake, guys. These drain pans, they fill up and you don't know because you can't see in them. And I almost did this without draining this, and that would have been a huge mistake. We would have had a mess, the likes of which you've never seen. But anyway, we're gonna start taking these 10s out. Hopefully we can get it to kind of, you know, aim more towards the back. That's the goal anyway. So I'm gonna get these out back here, and then we'll gradually start working our way forward. Hopefully we can catch this. Could be a mess, but we've had those before. And like I said, these are just 10s, but I want to change the filter. Obviously, anytime you're using a used transmission, I think it's a good idea. Should. Surprised we're not getting anything. It may be pretty dry. I tried to tilt it and drain as much as I could, but well. I hear some in there. Well, we may get lucky. I'm just gonna go ahead and take this thing all the way out there. And it's gonna be a mess. We're gonna get some. Tell you what I'm gonna do. We'll just move this over and let the pan catch it. At least as much as we can. Yeah, that'll work. Fluid looks pretty decent in there. We're gonna go grab, we'll let that drain for a little while and we'll go grab a filter and then I'll kind of show you guys how I'm gonna replace it. It's not much to it, you just pull one out and put a new one in. I've been letting this drain for, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes or so. And I'm gonna go ahead and pull this filter out. This is it here. And you wanna make sure there's several different filter options, guys, so make sure you're getting the right one for your application. As tight as that thing is, I'm gonna say we're not gonna replace the little piece that pushes in there. That is really snug. But you do wanna, I should have opened this one first. You wanna compare the two to make sure they're the same, because there's about 5 different ones of these, I think. I know there's for sure 3 different ones, depending on your transmission pan size, and then obviously the year of the transmission. This is the correct one. I just want to make sure. I'm just going to set this in here, to be honest with you. So, like I said, they come with a new little seal that you can push in there, but that one was really snug, so I'm going to leave the one in there that was in there. And that's all there is to it. Now, we do need to take the time to take this. Oh, this is a gasket that doesn't have to be replaced. They also make 2 different versions, one with and without a gasket. I bought the one with the gasket, thinking I would have to replace that, but that is actually a permanent style gasket, and it actually still looks really nice. So I'm gonna keep that one. And I'm gonna clean this surface area off, the surface area on this, and then we're gonna slide that pan right back up into place. I am gonna clean all the old transmission fluid out of the pan, but I won't show you guys that. We'll just get the surfaces all cleaned up and get this thing back in. So you can see I kind of cleaned the pan off a little bit, and we're ready to torque this thing down. So guys, 18 foot-pounds is what GM specs call for. And I'm gonna go in like a cross pattern, so kind of like you put on a wheel or any kind of other gasket. Kind of alternate sides. And yeah, that's kind of how I'm gonna do it. Once we get all the sides torqued down, then we'll move to the front. But 18 foot-pounds and we'll have this guy done. Go ahead and put, once we get those torqued down, go ahead and put this guy back on the side that we should have just left off and put in, but oh well. T40s. And the other thing we can do is once we get that tightened down, we can actually go ahead and start plugging a few things in. And And I'll take you off the tripod here in a second and show you what we're gonna plug in over here, but let me get these snug down and then we'll come over here and look at things. So the things that we can go ahead and plug in are our controller here. So on the side, we can go ahead and plug that in, which should be these two plugs right here. We'll get that, and then the rear speed sensor, or sorry, not the speed sensor, yeah, the speed sensor, we're gonna plug into the front. So this very front one, remember this has two, and on a segment swap, we would have a secondary one to run, but because we're not doing a segment swap, we just need to plug this guy in, and it's not working with one hand here. So plug this into the front, and then I'm gonna go grab the piece that we need to make this all work. So this little thing right here is literally a plug and play, and that is what allows us to not have to do a segment swap. I'm gonna be using this exact same thing in my Trans Am, and I've used it before, and guys, it works phenomenal. Now it does require some tuning, but we will show you that when we get to that point. So you plug in one, and then just plug in the other. We can make sure that we get it the way it needs to go here. There we go. And I may zip tie, you know, some of this up. Obviously, you know, this is meant to go a little further, but I'm gonna zip tie a lot of this stuff up at some point. But now I think we need to go, I still gotta source a couple bolts. I don't know if you guys noticed, but there's two bolts missing right here. And the reason why is because it had some sort of bracket from the vehicle that it came out of. So I need to get those before I put this on, but I will grab some of those, and the next step, we're gonna put this guy on and try to get the mount somewhat in place. I was able to, I couldn't find any bolts around the house that fit back here, so I just robbed them out of that other 4L80. I'm just gonna have to order some. But these guys need to torque to 46 foot-pounds, or sorry, not 46, oh my gosh, no, 26 foot-pounds. But there is one thing I screwed up on, guys. Remember when I hooked up that speed sensor that went, there's two speed sensors. There's an output back here in the back, and there's an input in the front. We actually need that plugged in the back here. So I'm gonna move it. I told you guys the wrong spot. It actually plugs in the back. I don't know what I was thinking. I was tired. This is a new day. But it plugs in here in the back. Sorry, I completely screwed that up. So make sure that you do that. Like I said, I'm gonna zip tie this up. But for now, we can go ahead and get the mount in place. So I did buy a new GM mount, and you can see it's shaped kind of weird. That longer section goes in the front here. So we need to go ahead and put that in and torque it to 18 foot-pounds. We've got that torqued to 18 now, and you could see that I had to move my screw jack down because where I'm lifting it, I had to straddle it with the new mount. So this is the new transmission mount. This is a conversion mount, which I'll list down in the description. Works pretty well, guys. This was what was in the red truck when I did it, and there's a couple different companies that make it. Can't go wrong with any of them. I've used both, and yeah, I haven't had any issues. So we're gonna go ahead, lift that thing up into place. Obviously we need to get our stud here in the center, and then we need to get it up in here. So we're gonna have to take it up a little bit, obviously, to get this in place far enough up where we can get our bolts just pushed through. One of the things I noticed when I got that in place, you can see I got my bolts started. Look at the way that's setting in there. I took the jack out, but what I'm thinking, guys, is I don't like the angle that's at. And maybe it tightens up as we tighten those bolts. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the jack back under here and get this kind of squared off, and then we will snug those bolts down. These bolts get torqued to 43 foot-pounds. I'm gonna run them down with the impact just a little bit to get them closer, and then I'm gonna torque them to 43, but only after I get that, you know, kind of more square in that bracket. We got everything torqued down now. It's nice and square, 43 foot-pounds. Remember, I did go ahead and tighten this guy down to 18. But as of now, I'm gonna go ahead and thread my shift linkage through this little guy here, and then there's a pin that holds it in place. I'm not gonna hook it up here yet because I'm gonna need to move that. And then the next thing is I'm gonna cut all my zip ties off of my like heat shield, my temporary heat shield for my hard lines for my transmission. But I really need to get those out of here because they're kind of in my way with routing, obviously, this new stuff. So I'm gonna do those two things off camera, and then we'll check back in. I think I'm gonna have to set the thing down in order to unplug, and if I do that, then I will show you guys what I'm talking about. But we need to take those trans lines out of the top, you know, the radiator up front. I'm trying to think of what I'm talking about here. So let's get that finished. I am gonna have to set this thing down to get those lines loose, but I wanted to show you guys this. So you just run this through, and there's a little pin. You can either slide it from the top or the bottom. I prefer the top just because vibrations could potentially shake it out. But that is what we've got now. And like I said, I'm not gonna hook this up yet because I'm not quite ready. I think I'm gonna have to move this around to get the torque converter bolts out, or in. But before I do the torque converter bolts, I wanna get these, you know, these metal lines out of the way. So we're gonna set this thing down and see if we can make a huge mess, probably, because it's gonna leak fluid. There's just no way around it. I've got them capped off back here, as you can see, but there's no, I don't know if there's any way you're not gonna get fluid everywhere. You can see we've got it down on the ground. You can see my dipstick tube. That's about where it needs to be, so I did it good. You know, you can really run it on either side of the lines that go to the heater core, but we need to unhook these transmission lines. You can see it right there. It's just I'm not going to be able to show you guys real well because to get my hand in there it's going to cover it up, but we're going to pop this little clip out, and I think I have some plugs. So when I pull this line out, I'm going to put a plug on the line, and then I'm going to try to put a plug in the transcooler opening here. I think I've got a couple. That's the plan anyway. So like I said, I'm sure you're going to make a mess. And then there is another one down there. I don't know that you guys can see it. Yeah, right down there. That other metal line that goes in there. We need to take both those out because we're not going to be using it. And then as long as we've got it down, we're going to go ahead and put our new transcooler in place up front. Now that we've got the lines unhooked, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and put the cooler in. So we need to, in order to do that, we need to take these out. And I'm just using my little pliers here. Probably gonna have to find a better place to set those, somewhere where they don't roll. But we need to get this piece off, and then we're gonna have to take the grill out of place as well, because we're gonna need access here behind the grill to mount the new cooler that we got. Now that we have that loose, just pull this thing off and set it aside. And then we need to get the grill out, and generally how this works, if it's the original, is there's just these little things that pull out. You'll have a Phillips in order to get those loose, and you should have 4 of those total. These are kind of hard to get to. I know a lot of people say to close up the bumper gaps on these things, but if you did, I don't know that you could get this out without breaking it. So we should be completely loose there. And then we have a 10 millimeter right here in the center, and then just clips on the outers. Get this 10 out. Not much really. And then we need to pull from the, I don't want to break this. And I don't want to scratch anything, so just pull easy, it should come out. We got that out of the way, and we got access to where we need. Now here's where things may differ depending on your truck and you know, what model you have, but you may have a cooler here. If you do, you're gonna have to remove that. Obviously we're not gonna be using that. It's an additional cooler that the factory put in back in the day. Mine doesn't have that, but mine does have a power steering cooler. Some do not, so you can see that here. That's gonna require some additional where there's some standoffs in it, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the first thing we need to do is, if you have that, remove all that, and then take these 2 tins out that hold this cross brace, and we need to make sure that we keep these 10 millimeters. The brace we won't be reusing, but the hardware we will. Well, this is where, you know, not everything fits everything. Okay, so there's supposed to be there's supposed to be holes in a lot of your trucks right here. And so you're supposed to assemble this, obviously, with that, there's supposed to be a hole on either side here. Well, my model does not have that. So we're gonna have to figure something out as far as mounting. Now the bottom, it lines up and we're gonna be fine there. So you can see this, and then our cooler will mount to that. And the standoffs that they're talking about are to clear this bracket right here. If you have such a bracket, you'll have to step it out just a little bit. But you know, that's just kind of how it goes sometimes, guys. You don't get, not everything fits everything. I mean, there's probably 100 designs of these trucks. These are riv nuts, and I don't have a riv nut gun, otherwise I would just drill a hole and put a riv nut in. So I'm gonna have to figure something out. Either I'm gonna have to come off maybe a different mounting area. I'm hoping that I can maybe, yeah, that's not gonna work. These brackets aren't quite long enough to reach from maybe here to there. So I may get some just flat steel and cut and drill holes. But what I'm gonna do before I do that is I'm gonna kind of set this thing up in place. So this is where that factory hardware comes into place. We're gonna go ahead and put that there. And then we'll put the other one on the other side and kind of get it where it needs to be, and put some bolts in and kind of see where we're at. Check it out, they knew that I didn't have that. So we're gonna have to make a hole, which is fine, that's cool, because we can use their bracket that way. But I'm looking over the instructions here, and it's saying to put our slotted hole facing up on the other side. So kind of like how this lines up in the center here, that's how we're supposed to do it. We're gonna go ahead and bolt it on, and I'm gonna use the standoffs since I do have the power steering cooler. If you don't have the power steering cooler, then you don't have to do that. You can see what they have here as far as standoffs go. So we're gonna put our bolt through the back like this, and then we'll put our standoff on. And that should hopefully stay in place while we get the actual cooler up here. And I'm loosely fitting this. I know it says to bolt the front down first, but I want to make sure that everything fits before I just go drilling random holes and making this thing look like Swiss cheese. So we got that. I'm going to set this thing up in place using those bottom holes. That looks pretty good, actually. And we're clearing everything. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and thread these on just loosely. And then the top's still loose as well, because I wanted to be able to maybe move the brackets around if need be. This looks pretty well designed, to be honest with you. I was wondering about those holes. If you had the factory trans cooler, those holes would be there. So I like this. I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and make sure everything's level. And I may even snug up the bottom here. It's an Allen head on the other side, and it looks like maybe a 3/8 or so on the other side. But once I get everything lined up, I'll go ahead and run these self-tapping bolts in, and we should have this thing mounted. I'm hoping though, you know, generally when you put a trans cooler in, you have issues with the grill fitting. I'm hoping we don't have to trim on the grill any. I've got everything adjusted like I want. I did go ahead and tighten up these guys. I believe, what size is this? 3/8 is the hardware size. But I did get these, actually no, sorry, 11 millimeter. But I did get these tightened up. And so now I'm gonna go ahead and run in our self-tapping bolts. Not my favorite method, guys, but it will work. vacuum that out. That makes me a little sick. So make sure you don't have any open lines where that metal is gonna get in it. That is solid. All right, I'm gonna get this other one in and vacuum this out, and we should be good to start maybe routing our lines up here. The last thing I'm gonna do here before we get back under the car or truck is pull these little rubber or yellow plastic caps out, and you have a fitting that goes in here that hooks this to the AN line that we're gonna be threading up through here. And so I'm just gonna tighten these up snug. Don't over tighten these guys. This is actually steel, stainless, but this is aluminum. So I'm gonna be using my AN wrenches just to make sure we don't have any issues. And you don't want to over tighten them, just get them snug. And then we'll put the other one in the other side, and then we're back to the bottom, because I don't want to just pull the lines up here and hook them up now. I want to make sure that everything is threaded in like it's supposed to be, and or you know, kind of routed the way it's supposed to be. And I really need to get the starter in place first, and then the torque converter bolts in, just because I want to have everything kind of where it needs to be before I go routing lines. Now that we got it back up in the air and I did get the trans lines out, oh my gosh, should they fight me, guys. We need to get the torque converter bolted up, right? So a good way to do this is, obviously, if you're up against the flywheel now, you maybe didn't get it in far enough. You can see that we have some space here, but we don't want to have too much. And a good way to measure it is it's an 1/8 inch. And so this is an 1/8 inch drill bit that I've got, and look, we have too much pullback, they call it. So they supply washers or spacers, and they say to use those. So we're gonna go grab those. We're absolutely gonna use them. That's just too much gap there. And I don't know if you also noticed, but this is a 3-bolt flywheel, and this has 6 bolt holes. So regardless if you're using it on a 6-liter style or a 4L80 style flywheel or flex plate, that would be, you could use it on either. That's why they do that. I talked to them on the phone. They're really great with customer service, guys. I definitely recommend them. But either way, you need to make sure your bolt holes line up. We've got them lined up, but we are definitely gonna have to use some spacers here. So they supply you with 6 of them, and they're different sizes, 3 being thicker and 3 being thinner. I don't know if you guys can see that. But we're gonna be using the thicker ones on this application. That's the closest, in my opinion, to where it needs to be. With that in there, it is right at 1/8 of an inch. So we're gonna be using those. Another thing they supply is thread locker. So we need to put thread locker on these, but I'm gonna go ahead. I've got my 24, you can see my extension hanging down there. 24 millimeter to turn this, because we're gonna have to turn the flywheel. We don't have any way to pry against it like we did with the 4L60 where we had that opening. It would just be really hard. Now they do make a tool that turns a flywheel, but it's gonna be a little cumbersome to get our washers up in there in between the converter. Obviously they go between the converter and the flywheel, and then the bolt in as well. But we'll get these in, put some thread locker on them, and then we'll talk about torque specs once we get all 3 in. Obviously, as we get one in, we will turn the engine over, get the next one started, and so on. Once you get your bolts in, I went ahead and torqued those to 50 foot-pounds. That hardware, that's what it calls for. Normally, I think it's around 47 or something like that, but I just followed the instructions with Circle D's website. And so we've got it all torqued down, so now we're on to the starter. At this point, we're ready to put the starter in. Now, I did go ahead and put that closeout panel. You can see this little piece of plastic right here, just a 10 millimeter here on the other side, but we need to put our starter in place. Remember, you need to hook up your 8 millimeter, and you need to hook up your 13 millimeter on the studs on the back, but be sure that they're not touching, guys, because like I've said in past videos, if these are touching and you hook the battery up, it's gonna try to start. So it's gonna be, I think we have enough room. I haven't tightened the lines or done anything with the lines, so we have room to move this out of the way, and then we'll get this up into place, and then we'll talk about what we're gonna torque it down to. Now we've got the starter slid up in place, and I've got them kind of snug down, but they need to torque to 37 foot-pounds. And then you need to make sure that you plug in your low oil level. So you can see this little plug here that I unplugged to get kind of out of the way. But at this point, so I'm gonna go ahead and torque that down to 37 foot-pounds. And then I'm gonna go grab my closeout panel that I have. I don't think it's gonna fit because of how close we are to the header here, but it might. So we're gonna go grab it and at least see. I'd really like to have it on here if I could, but you know, if we don't, it's not a big deal. A lot of these were open, especially back in the day. This is relatively newer stuff when they close it out completely. Used to, you could crawl into your car and see the torque converter. So it's not a huge deal if we can't, but at least let's give it a try. I've got the closeout panel like loosely fitted on, and it does fit. I was kind of surprised. It's actually quite a bit further away from that ear than I thought. I could actually trim some off. But I wanted to tell you guys a couple things that you need to take note of is there are 6 bolts that hold this thing on. 2 hold it to the transmission and 2 hold it to the block. The ones that hold it to the block are not threaded all the way to the top. The ones that hold it to the transmission are. So you should have 2 separate ones that go into the actual block itself. They are not threaded because look how thick that is there. The other thing you need to know is that we need to take this little closeout panel off on the driver's side. Otherwise, this won't go up into place the way it's supposed to. So just a 10mm to take that plastic one out because it has one built in to the cover. You can see that it's all closed out there. So I'm gonna go ahead and snug these down. Guys, 37 foot-pounds is what it calls for the transmission bolts, I believe. I'm not gonna get that crazy. This is just aluminum. I'm probably gonna torque them to like 20. Once we have that all tightened up, I did go ahead and I opted to get the line separators, the billet line separators you can see there. I've got those on. And it also tucks in the factory hard line spot. You have to bend them a little bit, but you can see where we're touching or inside of those. I ran it all the way up to the front. So I put another line separator there. And then guys, I didn't really like how much length I had. So I put one more line separator. It comes with 4. So we had 2 back there, 1 in between here. So right there, and then 1 right here. But then it's got a pretty good bend in it. I don't know if you guys can see that. I didn't love that. That's as much slack as I could take out and keep it out of the belts. So I chose to use zip ties to tie this line on. And then as you can see, we've got it loosely threaded on. I haven't tightened anything up yet, but the only other piece of the kit that I used is I used to run it down on the frame rail right there, just to make sure it doesn't, you know, just driving down the road, it doesn't flip up and hit like the AC belt. So either way, I think at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and just snug those lines up and get them tight, both here and on the transmission. But the downside is really the next thing I need to do is put the exhaust in. And I completely forgot about this, guys, which it's easier for me to show you without it, but to put the exhaust in, you do have to take this cross member loose. There's just no way to get around it. So I'm gonna have to take those bolts back out, let the transmission down a little bit in order to sneak my Y pipe in place, but that really is the next step. And honestly, that'll give me a little more room to tighten the fittings up here on the side of the transmission. I didn't wanna tighten them yet because they're still swiveling. I wanted to make sure I got, you know, the lines where I wanted them, but I'm pretty happy with where they're at now. They're not rubbing anywhere, not touching any moving parts. So we'll go ahead and try to slide the exhaust in at this point. All the exhaust hooked up. All the clamps are tight. I still need to go back and torque or re-torque the cross member here, but you can see that we've got the drive shaft kind of setting in here. The reason why, guys, is we're gonna have to do some stuff here. Obviously the slip yoke is not gonna work. So on this transmission, it didn't have a bolt-on yoke. It actually had a slip yoke. So I got a new one, which I'll list in the description down below, but we need to go all the way down and we need to pull that thing out about 1 inch. So we'll measure, once we get it all the way in, we'll pull it out 1 inch and get a measurement there. And then we will measure the old drive shaft, and I'm gonna have to take it and have it shortened, I believe. I think it's gonna have to be about 1 inch shorter, but I'll let you guys know if you're looking and you don't wanna have to measure. If you're using this mount, using a 4L6, or sorry, a 4L80 from, I believe 97 up, so as long as it has a 12 o'clock position, then you should be good with the measurements that I will list below. So, or at least I'll give you the amount that that you need to take off a stock V8 drive shaft. So I'm gonna measure that. And then at that point, guys, after I get everything torqued down, I think, and obviously I'll show you guys me putting the drive shaft back in, but we'll be ready to pour some fluid in this thing and see if it goes. Let me tell you what's really odd. It's actually showing to be the same length. So I'm gonna just go with it being the same length and just have them rebalance it with the new slip yoke for the 4L80. That's what I'm gonna do. And then we'll get it back in. So I'm gonna take this thing to the Driveshaft shop. Like I said, you guys will see it all in the same video here, but let's get this thing installed. Look what we have. We have the Driveshaft back from the Driveshaft shop. Luckily, guys, I have one within, I don't know, about 40 miles of me that I can take it to. They could change out the U-joints. This is something you could probably do on your own, but they rebalance it. I always like to have that done. Anytime I change U-joints or any kind of slip yoke or any of that, I like to have it rebalanced. So I had them put that on, rebalance it. We're all good now. We're ready to put this thing up in the truck. Obviously, we put in the transmission first, so we're gonna slide in the splines. I still left this unhooked, and it is in neutral. See this guy here? Because I'm not gonna be able to roll the truck on the lift. So at least I don't want to. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna spin the transmission end around until it lines up with obviously our U-joint back here in the back. And then we will get our straps in place, and then we'll talk about torque specs. But I wanna go ahead and get that thing in there, and golly, then we can put it down and put some fluid in it. Well, I've got these things in. They are 11 millimeter, if you guys forgot. Just make sure that this thing is centered. You don't wanna bolt it down with like one side hanging out and the other side not. So just generally there's a little bit of a recessed area on both sides. Just make sure that it goes in there nicely. So once you do that, 15 millimeters is what this torques to, so not a lot. Actually, it's crazy to think that this thing's spinning as fast as it is and 15 millimeters is all it holds in, but pretty tiny bolts there. After that, guys, really, you just need to make sure that everything's tied up. So I zip tied all my extra wiring kind of up here, including my vent tube, kind of routed it over here. Normally the vent tube clipped to the factory cross member. We don't have that anymore. So got that done, retorqued everything as far as the mounts because I had to put the exhaust in. Exhaust is all tight. The last thing we need to do is we do need to put it in park, and we need to snap this guy in place. It's on there. All right, well, I think we're finished on the bottom side. It doesn't hurt, guys, to go through and check just to make sure you didn't miss anything. Of course, we did tighten up our trans lines. That's an area of concern. The other thing is I did not yet put the grill back in because I'm wanting to make sure we don't have any leaks. So let's set this thing down and get some fluid in it. Now on to filling this thing. So I didn't put the dipstick tube in yet, which, guys, just so you know, the dipstick tube for the 4L60 and the 4L80 are the same. Or sorry, the dipstick itself. The tube is different, but the stick where you check the depth of the fluid is the same. But you're gonna need a long funnel like this. You're gonna slide it in place, and it is kind of cumbersome because, as you can see, it's kind of an awkward angle to pour stuff in. I probably should move you guys a little closer so you can see what's going on. But as far as fluid, I just went to my local parts store and got some fluid. I'll list down below what it is. It's just Merc on, or Dextron / Merc 3, I think, or whatever it's called. Just standard transmission fluid. Nothing fancy is needed in these transmissions. And I've heard that from a couple people, but I like to put a towel here while I'm pouring, and I'm gonna go grab, and then I also generally, if I keep one here, I also keep one down at the bottom, just because where that meets that tube, a lot of times you'll get a drip there. So let's go grab some fluid. I'm gonna start by putting probably, I'd say 4 quarts at least in it, probably more like 8 though. But I may put 4 in it, start it up, put 4 more in, and when I say start it up, I'll let you guys know if I do that. But just for a few seconds for that fluid to circulate for a second and then shut it right back off. It's kind of hard to see over here, but I'm just putting my light over here so we can kind of see where we're at as far as fluid goes. I don't want it to back up in the funnel. But I've got like the remainder of a jug in there. I think it was like maybe a quart possibly. I poured, you know, remember we poured some in the converter just so it had some, you know, primed, I would call it. But now we're gonna finish up pouring these 4 quarts in, and then we'll hook up the battery and then possibly try to start it, like I said, just for a few seconds and get some of that circulating. Make sure, like I said, you're watching where this connects. You're not dripping any down there. it may be a good idea to put a towel under there as well. It's going to drip directly on your manifold if you don't, and that's just going to be a terrible smell. So as I said, I've got about 5 quarts in it now. I'm going to go ahead, like I said, I'm going to start it for maybe 2 seconds, enough for the engine to turn on, and then immediately shut it back off. Then I'm going to pour 4 more in it. And you know, we got a lot of extra capacity here with this. This probably holds, man, I'd say 2 quarts at least with the lines, and maybe more, maybe more like a gallon when you figure in how long the lines are and whatnot. So yeah, I want to do that just so I can, you know, circulate some. It's not all sitting in the pan. And not going to put it in gear or anything, just turn it on, turn it back off. The other place you want to watch, guys, make sure you're not dripping any down below, and I'm not, at least as of right now, because sometimes you think you get your dipstick tube all the way seated and you don't. I've had that in the past. So then you pour, you know, $30 worth of transmission fluid on the ground. You don't want to do that. So anyway, I'm going to start this thing up. If it'll start, it looks like my battery's kind of, that light looks kind of dim, but either way, we'll start it and then keep going. Now that I've poured 8 quarts in it, you need to pull your funnel out, and we're going to put our dipstick tube in and just check where our fluid's at, because you don't want to overfill it either. I don't think that's going to be enough. I guess technically I got about 9 quarts in it, and then probably around 10 if you count what's in what I poured in the converter. So, but I think we're right there on the cusp of, I'm thinking it's going to take around 12, but I may be wrong. So either way, I'm going to pull this out. We're going to check it on the dipstick and kind of see where we're at. I've started it twice. I did that between each of those gallon containers that I filled in. Started it for like 2 or 3 seconds, shut it off. And so I'm hoping that I've gave it some time to settle, and we'll give it a check. I think I've got the fluid where I want it, but before we fire this thing up and try to go like forwards or backwards, we do need to make some changes in the computer. So what I'm doing is I've opened HP Tuners. If you already have your file ready, it's, you know, that's good. I'll show you basically from that point. But you open HP Tuners, you go to read. You can see the little green up here. It is reading the truck. I've already had this thing tuned for the cam that's in it, and this transmission, obviously, or not this transmission, but the one before. So I'm just going to read this file and make changes to that file. And so because I'm not sure where, I think it's on another computer, the last file that he sent. So that way we know we're adjusting the file that's in the truck currently. I'm not starting from scratch on a stock one. So either way, let's get this read, and then I'll show you guys what changes need to be made. So once we have that file, it's going to open where you can make changes. So obviously I saved it, and I saved it, you know, save it for something you'll remember. I can go ahead and unplug this actually for now, which I'm going to. Just kind of drape it over here. Okay, so with this, we're not doing a segment swap. So you definitely do not want to try to write a segment swap in. But the very first thing it says to do is max out trans component diagnostic enable temp, and that's under the trans diag. So up here at the very top, you'll see a series of different categories: engine diag, trans diag. So we go into trans diag, and then it says to max out the trans component. So there's a trans component over here, diagnostic enable temperature. So we need to max that out. So whatever the max value you can put in, we'll make that change. So I put in 999 degrees Fahrenheit. Obviously it'll never get to that. So that, just want to make sure that double check. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one only applies if you're going 4L70 to 4L80, so we don't need to do that. And then it says some vehicles require P0741 to be set to no error. So let's go check out what that is. If you go to system, sorry, I'm completely wrong. Engine diag, which is the second one. Well, OS, then engine diag. We go down to P0741. That's quite a ways down here. Torque converter clutch solenoid circuit stuck. All right, so let's turn that off and go to no error reporting. I don't see that being an issue, so we might as well take it off. So we've got that, and then it says You must tune for 4L80 shift points, and obviously because the gearing's different, this has a 248 first gear, and it lists all this on the paperwork here. We need to go make those changes. So we're gonna go into, let's see here. Oh, this is in shifting. So we go into trans and change that according to, they tell you at the bottom what to multiply it by. So, but I'll read through these other things. It says must tune the shift points. Obviously, I just talked about that. Park reverse neutral drive switch is the same, so you don't have to mess with that. That's the thing on the side of the transmission that we took off the 4L60 and put on the 4L80. It's the same, and they share the same switch, so you don't have to do anything there. Obviously, we leave that front speed sensor unplugged. The very front one, remember there's two on the 4L80. There's only one on the 4L60. You need to plug that in the back, which I showed you guys. On a segment swap, you'd have another one that you had to run from a computer, similar to what you guys saw on the red truck when I did it, if you guys want to go back and check that video out. And then the last thing is just changing the gear ratio. So in order to change the gear ratios, it said, you know, you want to multiply your first to second shift and your second to first downshift points by 1.23, multiply the 2 and 3 and the 3 downshift to 1.10, and then do not modify the 3-4 shift or the 4-3 downshift. So you're not going to modify those. And then you can modify the torque converter lockup points if you guys want to. It also says that, you know, you don't have to do this, but it is it's one of those things you probably should do. I'm not going to change anything in here. So like when you look under general, under trans type, it does not tell you to change it to a 4L80. If you do, that could cause some other issues. So just leave it reporting as a 4L60. Because we're not doing a segment swap, it should still say 4L60 there. So that is what we want to do. Up here under transmission, you have your gear ratios, so you can change those within this right here. So we can go through and change each one of these, which I will do. So first gear ratio is now 2.48. Second gear ratio is now 1.48. Third gear ratio is still 1-to-1, and fourth gear ratio is 0.75 instead of 0.70. So a little higher fourth gear in this thing. The third gear we don't mess with. So that's the gear ratios we're going to change. And then shift points, like I said, I don't even know that I'm going to mess with that yet. I may send this to my tuner if I don't like it, but yeah, I just don't know that I want to mess with that right now. We may have my tuner look at that, because I just don't feel comfortable enough doing that. Now it tells you step-by-step in the instructions, but we're gonna flash this back in the computer. So I'm gonna save this file as after 4L80 green truck. That's what I put it in, and then we will hit the flash button, turn the key back on, and flash this new change. Now I'm only going to flash the changes, so it'll give you the option to flash entire or write entire or write changes. I'm just going to write the modifications. Well guys, what I ended up doing, I did go ahead and eke through this. If you go to the transmission tab and you go to shift scheduling, I went through each one of these. So this normal, and I multiplied all the 1-2 and the 2-1 shifts by what the paperwork said, by 1.23, multiplied all the 2-3s by 110, and so on. And so I just went through each one of these tabs. It's a lot. Each one of these, I went through and did that. So we're gonna give it a test anyway. You know, if it doesn't run or if it doesn't shift like I want it to, we can always have him address that. But the main focus is doing the first stuff that I did, and we can address the shifting later. I just want to make sure the thing goes in gear, and I wanted to make these changes beforehand because that over temp I think would have caused us a problem. So either way, we're going to go ahead and close this out. And so up here at the top, you see the little red arrow that says write. We need to plug this thing back in, and we need to write the new changes to it. And then I'm going to at least try to start it up and get it to go forward and backwards. Well, you guys are going to get to see real time here whether it works or not. I've got some blocks set up in the front and the back of the transmission, or the wheels, And we're just gonna start it up and see if it'll go in reverse, forward, and then we'll check the fluid again. But this is where you find out if you bought a good used transmission or not. You know, you can always take somebody's word for it, and I trust the guy I bought it from, but you never know. So we're gonna try it here at least, keep checking the fluid, make sure we're good there before we give it a road test. Try reverse first. That's a good sign. We'll try some drive. Well, that's good at least. Now we're going to shut it off and check the fluid. So I will tell you guys that the fluid dropped quite a bit just doing that. But you have to think, you know, you're filling up all these extra pieces that we didn't have before. So this is why I like to do that. I'm probably gonna let it ride where it is because it's still closer to the full, and obviously we don't wanna overfill, but I may do this a couple more times, and then of course, I won't show you guys that, but I will take you out on a road test and we will see if this thing will go between first, second, and third, and fourth, if we can get up that fast here close, and just give it a test. This is one of those things that, to me, guys, it's better to check it and check it and check it and check it. So I'll probably do this 4 or 5 times just for my own peace of mind, and then I'm gonna go around and check each one of these fittings, probably lift this thing back up, making sure everything's dry, because I don't want a replay of what we did in the red truck where I get it like, it was fine around the house. I get it out in the middle of town about 5 miles away from my house and I blow a line off. I don't think that's gonna happen because these aren't rubber, but still, I'm a little skittish. And so just take your time, do this, you know, add fluid, move it back and forth, check it, add fluid if you need to. Just don't add too much because it sucks to have to go drain it out. I don't have a drain in the pan, so we would have to take the pan down in order to drain some or try to suck it back out of the fill tube, which is no fun either. So just like I said, take your time here. So here's the deal. Check the fluid. Obviously we went back and forth on the lift, just a little bit, but now it's crunch time. We're gonna pull it off the lift. I'm gonna check it one more time, and then I think we're gonna get it out on the road and see what's going on. So you notice, like I said, I left the grill out because we're still checking to make sure there's no leaks in any of the connections that we put on. But let's give it a shot, guys. Okay guys, so that did not go as planned, and you can see we're back on the lift. So there is some good news, right? So let's talk about the good news and then we'll talk about the bad news. So the good news is none of my stuff is leaking. So the trans cooler is great, no leaks whatsoever in any of the fittings. So I was worried about that. That was my biggest concern, that I maybe didn't get them snug down enough. They're just aluminum, so you don't want to get them really crazy tight. So no leaks there. But when I was taking it out, so when you guys saw me just pull it off the lift, it was going in forward, going in reverse. I get it out, drive kind of around my shop, up front, just kind of go back and forth. I should have taken you guys with me, but it didn't act like the converter was locking up. And then at first I didn't think it was shifting. Well, it shifted through first, second, third, fourth. So I had all my gears in reverse. So I pull it back because I thought, well, maybe something's going on with the wiring. Pull it back in here. And when I'm pulling it back in here, I noticed there was some drips of transmission fluid on the floor, and I was like, oh, that's probably my fittings, and It actually wasn't. It was the factory cooler. I put plugs on that and some of that leaked out. So that was good. But I did notice when I had it off the lift that I had a spot of transmission fluid, which you guys can see down here on the floor. This little spot right here. And that is actually coming from the wiring harness. You can see right there. You can see the drip on the very end of it. And so I pulled that wiring harness out, and guess what? It was completely covered in fluid. So I think we're gonna have to replace that harness. You can do that. And so I'm gonna have to order one of those. The other thing though is it sucks because you're gonna have to take the exhaust back off because the pan has to come out, and you can't get the pan out with the exhaust there. So we're gonna take the exhaust off, and then we'll have to take probably the trans mount out. And I just went in the house. This is the next morning, and I was just extremely frustrated. And so I cleaned that off, put it back in, and well, before I even did that, I tried to move it again and it wouldn't move. And then I got a P1810 error, which is generally means there's something up with the wiring. So that's what made me come down here and check that stuff. But either way, I cleaned that off, put it back together, and we had gears again. It would go forward and backwards. But here's the deal. This is the second time I have used one of these harnesses. And nothing against the harness, guys. I think it probably does work for some people. But I am going to order the segment swap. And I say I'm going to order, all it is a jumper that plugs in. You could actually move some wires around in your factory harness. I'm just going to buy the little jumper piece, and then I'm going to run the extra input speed sensor back and do the segment swap. I think is what I'm going to do. We're going to try that at the same time that I'm going to fix the rest of this, but I think effectively we're done for this video. It's going to take me at least a week or so to get parts, and we're going to dig into it and see exactly what's going on. Hopefully when we pull the trans pan down, the fluid looks good. I think it does from the look on the dipstick, but hey, we want to check that. The other thing I want to check is I want to make sure that my dipstick tube is registering where it needs to be, so the fluid level. But we'll talk about that in the next video, guys. It's kind of a bummer. I really wanted to finish this up because I wanted to start something else, and I'm excited to do that. I've been wanting to do it for probably 10 years now. Hopefully you guys, if you've watched long enough, know what that is. But either way, if you guys are enjoying watching me struggle, please, like always, smash that thumbs up button, guys. If you are not subscribed, please go down there, hit that subscribe button. Of course, ring that bell icon that notifies you every time we drop a new video, and stay tuned to see this thing back on the road.